your Margie
That's fine.
and
It's really Marjorie, but my mother was the only one who called me that.
and Rauh, right?
Correct.
My mother is a Marjorie too. But good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. History and political science textbooks, which inherently lag a minimum of at least 25 years behind reality, take it for granted that our political life is organized by political parties. Anybody who follows politics seriously, however, knows that over the last 30 years, a growing sophistication in the use of television and direct mail, funded by professional fundraising, has made it increasingly possible for candidates and office holders to relate directly to the voters. The traditional legions of party volunteers who stuff envelopes, knock on doors, and staff phone banks to turn out the party faithful have dwindled almost as fast as the number of voters who identify themselves as members of political parties. The role of political parties in local politics once again came under scrutiny in the closing weeks of 1997. In an intense campaign that cost $2.5 million, 18 city council candidates carefully shielded their party affiliations, except when they were certain that they were addressing people who thought of themselves as party members. And after the election, in which the voters returned 5 Democrats to the majority, that party failed in an embarrassing turn of events on the eve of the council swearing in to get their members to cooperate. The result was that 2 Democrats, Dwight Tillery and Minette Cooper, broke with the other Democrats and formed a coalition with the 3 Republicans to organize council. What is the current status and future prospects of political parties in local politics? To discuss that issue, I am joined this morning by the heads of the 3 local parties. Mike Allen is the president of the Hamilton County Republican Party. Tim Burke is the president of the Hamilton County Democratic Party. And Margie Rauh is the president of the Charter Committee of Cincinnati. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Tim, given what's happened, given what you've been through in the last 5 weeks in the Democratic Party, what is the state of party politics? What is the significance of party politics in local affairs?
Oh, I think that there remains a very important role for party politics and for parties in leading on issues, in developing candidates, in encouraging people to be involved in the political process. But I don't think any of us would disagree that the power of parties to control things isn't what it was 50 or 60 years ago. The Charter Committee of Cincinnati has seen to that. But in seriousness, we don't have bosses in party politics today who can dictate to candidates or office holders what they can do. And frankly, in this late date of the 21st century, I'm not sure we should have that kind of boss control of politicians.
Well, there's a reference there to the charter rights. Margie, there's an old charter rights saying that there isn't a Democratic or a Republican way to fix a pothole or to pick up the garbage. There's just an efficient or an inefficient way to do it. Does it bother you from a charter right perspective to see what's happening in terms of political party identification, political loss of power and influence of political parties, this whole sort of mosaic of what's happening right now?
It does from the point of view of the health and well-being of the city and the region and the general population of our country. I really feel so strongly that people are disenfranchised because of so much of what has been going on as an undercurrent of politics. And we see it from the standpoint of trying to recruit new members to charter or to talk with people in the neighborhoods. They're very, very reserved about getting involved because of what they see as being not a very pleasant situation. And so, you know, when we discussed the possibilities of topics on the phone, one of the things you suggested was the goals of the parties. Mm-hmm. And certainly one of the major goals of the Charter Party is to create more of an awareness in the general public on the purpose of organized politics and organized groups and the influence they can have.
Let me get back to that in a little bit. Let's clarify a little bit more about the situation. But I will come back to that point because I think it's a very important point. I think the charter rights maybe stand in a little bit different place than the Republicans and the Democrats.
Absolutely.
Maybe that's a presumption. Mike, talking about this, in some ways, from the outside, it may look like the Republicans are the party that are organized and moving forward and got their act together, and some people would even say that you were the mastermind behind Tim's headaches over the last 5 weeks. From your point of view, what are the causes on local level of this sort of decline in influence, organizational strength of the parties?
As far as the Hamilton County Republican Party goes, we are in pretty good shape, I think. As a matter of fact, we're in very good shape. We're the predominant party in the county. We can be competitive in the city of Cincinnati, but I agree with Tim, and I think with Margie, that the role of political parties over the last 30 years has declined, as you point out. But again, we're still pretty strong as a party. We're pretty organized, and I'm happy with the way things are progressing. But if you look at the influence of political action committees, I think that's one of the things that have caused the decline of political parties. The Sunshine Law, which is a very well-intentioned law, but it prevents political leaders from talking to their people a lot of times.
Practically, how would the Sunshine Law, which I think, of course, a lot of it is reflected because of the press's desire to be on the inside representing the people, how does the Sunshine Law affect?
Very, very practical example is we have 3 Republican county commissioners. I am not permitted under the Sunshine Law, nor do I have even formal or informal meetings with our 3 commissioners. That is prohibited. It makes for difficult communication, and it's not a situation where I'm going to get all 3 of them in a room and say you're going to do this, this, and this. But it is good for political leaders to have communication with their members, and the Sunshine Law many times prohibits it. I think it's a very well-intentioned law, but it does kind of hamstring political leaders.
Tim, did you face some of that same problem in just negotiating the organization of council? Didn't you have to rotate somebody out all the time?
Absolutely. We could not have the 5 Democrats in a room together, because to do that we would have had a majority of the council in a room discussing city business, and that's prohibited under the Sunshine Law. So we had to keep people out of the room and rotate, as you suggested.
And given that, both of you have criticized it, would you call for a repeal or a change in the Sunshine Law?
I think you have to look at it, because I don't think there's anything wrong with a political leader addressing the people that are in his party, his or her party. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's a well-intentioned law that I think needs to be at least looked at.
Margie, would you support a revision of the Sunshine Law?
I don't know. It would all depend on what that revision would be. Charter looks very carefully at any reform actions that are put on the table. You know, as the oldest reform movement, municipal movement, certainly in the country, it's one of our roles, and so we would be interested in looking at it. I don't think we've had this opportunity or problem in the last 1,000 years, but nevertheless.
To worry about a majority.
Exactly.
Tim, what about you?
The Sunshine Law, I think, is a politically very popular law with the voters, as is the Public Records Law, and there are some important public interests involved in that. On the other hand, if we could carefully articulate to the general public why it was necessary to allow the kinds of meetings that Mike has talked about, I think the public would be willing to accept that. We saw a small example of that in Amberley Village just this past fall, where there was an effort to force the village council there not to have any private meetings and even to discuss pending litigation. And that was submitted to the voters, and the voters approved the continuation of executive sessions there under certain limited circumstances. And a carefully defined modification to the Sunshine Law would make some sense.
Okay. One of the things that I think people see as they observe city council particularly, and with the, let's just call it the decline of influence of political parties, is that it's revolved down to personal ambition. Now, personal ambition in politics, those are 2 things that aren't new to each other. I mean, that's part of the story. The irony, though, that strikes me in the Cincinnati situation is that with a weak mayor form of government, where the collective council as a whole makes the decision form of government that we have, where there is no single real powerful position that's an elected office, what you end up with is political personalities fighting not so much for power, but just to block other people's power. It's almost a negative sort of thing. Is that a fair analysis of where we are at this moment?
I think in some cases it is, for the most part, and I underline for the most part. Our three Republicans are on the same page on most issues, but there is no question that personalities play a role in Cincinnati City Council, and I gotta think Tim would agree with me on that.
I don't disagree with that, and part of that is the manner in which we currently elect the mayor, which creates a situation in which everybody is constantly competing for the next election in hopes that they can be the #1 vote getter and become mayor. I don't think that the system itself necessarily dictates the kind of personality conflicts that we have had over the last few years, but it certainly contributes to it when you have the competition to be #1.
You know, this possibility of reforming the way we elect the mayor and the way, in fact, we elect council. It's not just the mayor's position that's being talked about. It's being floated out there. Margie, what charter, of course, is identified with the essential elements of the system that we live with now and have lived with since the mid-1920s. What do you think about changing the system so that we elect the mayor differently, so that there was a strong mayor, so that the person who came in #2 no longer is on council to be there and be mad about things? What do you think about that?
Let me define two things. First of all, there's direct election of the mayor, and second of all, there's direct election of a strong mayor. And what is being proposed now, and petitions are being circulated to have it on a May ballot for the voters, and certainly which would have enormous amounts of input, we would hope, before that election, is direct election of the mayor with very small amounts of added power. The city manager form of government, however, would be maintained. The mayor would be elected for a 4-year term. The councilpersons would be elected for 4-year terms, which hopefully would reduce the amount of expense connected with the political campaigns, and that it would create a more cohesive type of government, having the mayor as a clearly defined elected person by the people.
And charter has backed this at this point. Is that my understanding?
Well, it's very interesting. Yes and no. Because we have a diverse group of people involved in charter, there will be charterites who will still go back to the mayor should be elected from within. And perhaps that is the best method to get things done.
In some theoretical way.
Of course. But you know, it's 1998. I have to keep saying that to myself. And things move on. Other cities are using this method very successfully.
Right. Mike, you know, one of the things, you were saying that the Republican Party is in pretty good shape, and compared to maybe the Democratic Party, things look a little bit more organized. We know all the long-time sayings about the Democrats and being an organized group anyway. But, you know, there's another way of looking at this. That is, you've got a minority on council, but a minority that is working with 2 Democrats in a majority coalition. You also have a total control of the county commission, and have forever, practically, and yet the ability to get the county and the city to work together, seeming any advantage to having strong Republican control both places or influence both places. Where's the payoff there? Where's the party discipline across local government units?
Yeah, answer that one.
It's tough. I mean, when you've got the county and the city working together, whether it's Republican or Democrat, it's tough because there are conflicting interests. But if you look at the events of the last week, I think what you're seeing and what you will see very soon is the county and the city working together and accomplishing a deal with respect to the stadiums. Tom Nyer has been working very carefully and very, I think, responsibly with City Manager John Shirey to do that. So they can work together, but it is a challenge when you get the city and the county together. Just to jump back a little bit with respect to the charter proposal, there's a lot in that proposal that the Republican Party likes, especially 4-year council terms. Where our problem arises with respect to that proposal is what's going to happen with term limits, which was passed overwhelmingly by the voters in 1991. that's our kind of reluctance to jump on board with it.
Worried that you'll restart the term limit
Absolutely.
clock.
And that's not what the voters voted for, and clearly it's not what they want.
We're just about out of time for this segment, Tim, but just very quickly, what about from the Democratic point of view on this proposal? Then we'll come back to other things.
I like the 4-year terms. I don't think it starts the term limit clock over for the members of council. I do think it starts the term limit clock over for those who would run directly for the office of mayor. I'm not certain about the method of the direct election of mayor that's in this package. We're going to have to take a closer look at the whole thing.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a break, but we'll come right back. Stay with us. After the break, we'll talk about the future of the political parties in Cincinnati. Welcome back. Margie, one of the questions that, I've tried to ask some tough questions of the Democrats and tried to ask a tough question of the Republicans. With the charter rights, you've been around since 1924. Third parties traditionally exist for a short period of time, then disappear. You have this very unusual experience in your history.
Isn't it amazing?
Isn't it amazing? But you, the party, the committee,
Right.
is facing a situation where your longtime elected leader, Bobby Stern, is term limited out. She cannot run again. You have not been able over the last few elections to generate a new elected charter right.
Correct.
What's the future of charter, or is there a future of charter as as a party that elects candidates?
Well, let me first of all say to you that in our board meeting yesterday, I proposed that instead of looking at this as 1998, we look at it as 1999 and we start campaigning. And we have Jim Tarbell, who came within a hair of moving into that 9th position. We have Bryn Lewis, who is a very bright, energetic, enthusiastic, and clearly interested in a broad section and diverse section of the community as an up-and-coming candidate. We will be looking at women and minorities and other possibilities of a potential candidate.
Let me just play. Let me play
we're in there.
Let me play devil's advocate. Jim Tarbell's one question. Okay.
Correct.
But the charter over the last 6, 7 longer years has put up a whole series of bright, interested, attractive candidates. But you haven't been able to generate the funds, the campaign. You haven't been able to generate the push that these guys, or especially this guy, the Republicans can put behind that new candidate. Can charter any longer take somebody, find that diamond in the rough, and turn them into something?
I believe we can. I think it's a struggle. I'm not going to paint any kind of pretty picture, but definitely there are people out there who will come forth and will prove to be very well qualified and caring candidates for the city of Cincinnati. Can they get elected? Yes, I believe so. I think that the public is beginning to see that the charter rights put out really good qualified candidates.
Well, we may be coming back to that a lot of times, but just to focus on something different. As parties, the number of people in parties who identify themselves either as Republican or Democrats, as it doesn't apply because of the way the law is written to charter rights because it's just a local party. But as the number of people narrows down, a number of active people gets smaller, is there a problem here that the people who really control, not just on a national level, on a local level, control what the party is on a local level, is a narrower and narrower group, ideologically oriented, and can raise the money one way or the other? For you, the Young Conservative Coalition, Chris Finney, being able to decide with litmus test who's a Republican and who's not. For Tim, Labor, who's able to put up the money and decide whether or not this person should be a Democrat or not and be a candidate. Is this a problem that the parties are going to become too narrow?
It's not for us. If you look at our city council slate, for example, we had a pretty wide spectrum of political philosophies. We had some people that could be considered politically conservative, and I think some that could be considered moderate to liberal. There's no litmus test in our party. We have a big tent, and we'll continue to do that. So,
moderate to liberal. Who?
Well, I think Diane Goldsmith would probably fit in that category. She's certainly not a conservative.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
But where was the money to make to give her the push to get over the top?
Fundraising is tough, and Diane ran, I think, an excellent race with the money that she had. But the point I'm trying to make is there are no marching orders that come from the Republican National Committee for our local party, I can tell you that, and we truly are a broad
What
tent.
about from local groups, though, that maybe the general public doesn't recognize?
Yeah, you have to solicit their input, and you have to listen to them, but they certainly don't rule our party. They don't.
A lot of money dumped into Mary Irish Keeney in the school board race that it's hard to read that any other way than preparing for a next race down the road. I mean, when...
Yeah, that was by the Conservative Forum, which is an independent group, a group that I was very influential in founding in the early 90s. But, I mean, obviously we listen to their opinions, and their opinions matter, but they're not directing the affairs of the Republican Party. We have a broad constituency.
Tim, what about you in labor?
I would argue that we also have a broad constituency, but I would be very frank in saying we work very closely with organized labor and with some other interest groups, particularly the leadership of the African American community. Between labor and the African American community, that truly is the base of the Democratic Party, and our democratic philosophy comes out of that. It is a philosophy of the people, it is a philosophy of working people, and we're going to be true to that. That doesn't mean that we dictate to our candidates and office holders on specific issues, and I think if you look just at the Democratic elected officials in Hamilton County, with a range from Jerry Lubers on one side to perhaps Tyrone Yates on the other side of the spectrum, we too offer a pretty diverse view of politics and governing.
Well, you know, there's two ways to look at that, Margie. I'll come back to the point that you were bringing up early in the show. What do parties stand for? One way of saying it is, you know, it's the Big Ten approach. We allow a lot of different people. The other way, the reverse side of that is, do the parties stand for anything? Now, Charter has had a philosophy, has been able to focus on city affairs. Does Charter still stand for anything? And do the other two parties, in your view, stand for anything in terms of principle?
Certainly. Charter stands for not only city government and quality city government and good products that the city can produce for the general public, but also we are looking at the regional situation in terms of how the cooperation can take effect and be more useful to the area. I'm very frightened by some of the groups that are, quote, not influential in the Republican Party. I'm not as frightened, perhaps, of
Who are you frightened by?
The family rights groups, the Citizens for Values. Community values.
Why are you frightened by that?
I don't want someone to dictate my tastes or my way of life. I think that's a very scary thing. I think that's infringing on my privacy,
Mike,
and that
what about
bothers
that?
me.
We're going to be running out of time. What about that?
Nobody's dictating anything to anyone. I'd be interested in concrete examples as to where that happens. I mean, those groups are part of a broad constituency, but Margie can't even accurately recite the names of the groups. I'd be interested in hearing examples of how they're dictating either to me or to council members or anything. It just doesn't happen.
It starts in very small ways, in people getting elected to school boards, in looking at library books and various
And are you saying that these groups really are the Republican Party, but they just have other names? Are you getting at the same point that I was raising with both of these guys?
Well, let me just say, from my position, it looks as though they are members of the Republican Party. Now, I may be totally wrong, but I don't think so.
Well,
we're going to run out of time real quick, right?
Nobody's dictating anything to anyone. And I think what is scary in some ways is the influence of organized labor in the Democratic Party. One of the reasons why you don't see managed competition in this city, like you do every other city, is because of the influence of the labor unions, and that's a real shame.
Tim, we got less than a minute. What about that? I mean, realistically, is it, you were saying you're not worried about labor, but isn't it?
I think we're going to continue to work very closely with the leadership of organized labor, the leadership of many community groups. There is a real concern about how far and how quickly we ought to go with what they euphemistically refer to as managed competition, because what it does is kill very valuable, very good jobs that pay a living wage.
Well, we're starting to get to some tough issues here at the end. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for being with us this morning. We leave you this morning with the sounds of some people who have found the rhythm of life, The cast of Stomp winds up their week-long Cincinnati performance at the Aronoff tonight. Enjoy.